I, Kalen of the Iron Fang Pack, reject you, Seraphina, as my mate and Luna.
The great hall of the Iron Fang Pack was full to bursting. Every alpha, elder, and warrior in the kingdom had come to witness the bonding. Torchlight turned the stone walls to amber, and garlands of winter jasmine hung from the rafters in pale cascades. The air smelled of cedar smoke and ceremony. It was the most beautiful room Seraphina had ever stood in, and she stood at its center, in a gown of white silk that Kalen himself had chosen for her. She could feel every eye. Hundreds of wolves pressed into the hall, their bodies warm with expectation, their silence reverent. Seraphina kept her chin lifted. Her hands did not shake. She had practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times, the words, the bond, the golden thread that would tie her soul to his forever. She loved him. She had loved him since she was 16, and feral and starving. And he had looked at her with those iron-gray eyes and said, "You are more than what they made you." Kalen stood across from her at the altar stone, tall, broad-shouldered, the crown of the Iron Fang gleaming at his brow. He was every inch a king, but something was wrong with his face. She could see it in the way his jaw was set, the way his gaze kept sliding to a point just past her shoulder. A coldness she had never seen before. The elder began the rite, but Kalen raised his hand and the old wolf fell silent. The hall held its breath. "I, Kalen of the Iron Fang Pack," he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the room, steady and deliberate and merciless. "Reject you, Seraphina, as my mate and Luna." The silence that followed was worse than screaming. It pressed against her eardrums. Seraphina felt the words land in her chest like a blade slipped between ribs. Not the sharp shock of a wound, but the slow, nauseating realization that the blade had been there all along and someone had only just twisted it. From the crowd, a woman stepped forward. Isolde, daughter of the Highland Pack's alpha, golden-haired, highborn, everything Seraphina was not. She moved to Kalen's side with the ease of someone who had already been promised this place. Inside Seraphina, her wolf howled a raw, broken sound that no one in the hall could hear. But Seraphina herself did not cry. She would not give them that. Not the elders who had always whispered that an Omega did not belong beside a king. Not Isolde, whose pale eyes watched with something that might have been pity and might have been triumph. Not Kalen, who could not even look at her. Slowly, with hands that she forced to remain steady, Seraphina unclasped the bonding bracelet from her wrist. It was silver, etched with the Iron Fang sigil, a gift he had given her the night he asked her to be his. She placed it at his feet, on the cold stone of the altar. Then she turned and walked out of the great hall. Her gown whispered against the floor. No one followed. No one spoke. The doors closed behind her with a sound like a coffin lid. She had been nothing before him. That was the truth she could not outrun, even now, even with the night air burning her lungs as she moved through the corridors of the keep. Seraphina had no family name, no pack lineage, no blood right. She was an Omega, the lowest rank a wolf could carry. Her mother had died when she was 11. Her father had never existed in any way that mattered. By 14, she was running with the borderland strays, half feral, surviving on scraps and fury. Kalen had found her at the edge of his territory when she was 16, thin as wire, snarling, ready to fight the patrol wolves twice her size. He had crouched down in front of her like she was a wild thing worth approaching carefully. And he had said with a gentleness that shattered something inside her, "You don't have to run anymore." He brought her into the Iron Fang. He trained her himself, taught her to fight, not with desperation, but with precision, taught her to read, to speak before councils, to hold herself like someone who had a right to be in the room. Year by year, he had lifted her from nothing. And year by year, she had loved him more, not because he was powerful, but because he had once looked at her like she was enough. The years between had been the happiest of her life. She remembered the first time he sparred with her, really sparred. Not the careful, patronizing drills the trainers used. He had knocked her down 7 times, and she had gotten up 8. And afterward, he had looked at her with something that was not pity, but admiration. She remembered the night on the northern watchtower when he told her about his father, the old Alpha King, who had ruled through fear and died alone. "I don't want to be that," he had whispered. "I want to be better." And she had believed him, wholly and without reservation, because she had needed to believe that someone in this world meant what they said. She remembered the morning he asked her to be his Luna. He had taken her to the high meadow above the falls, where the wildflowers grew so thick they swallowed your boots. And he had held both her hands and told her she was the strongest person he had ever met. The bonding bracelet had been warm from his pocket when he clasped it around her wrist. She had cried. He had laughed and kissed the tears off her face and called her his fierce little wolf. And she had thought, this is what it feels like to be home. She had built her entire identity on the foundation of his belief in her. And tonight at the altar, he had pulled that foundation out from under her feet and let her fall. The rejection was not just romantic. It was the erasure of everything she had become. Every council meeting where she had fought to be taken seriously. Every dawn spent training until her muscles screamed. Every small, hard-won victory that had told her she belonged, all of it, undone in a single sentence, in front of everyone who had ever doubted her. She left the keep through the servants' gate, still wearing her bonding gown, the white silk already staining with mud at the hem. The night was moonless and cold. She carried nothing. The road out of Iron Fang territory was long and dark, winding through dense forest and over frozen streams. She walked without stopping. Every step sent a tremor through the mate bond, or what remained of it. She could still feel Kaelin at the other end, a distant pressure, like a hand pressing against bruised skin. At the outer gate, she stopped. Not by choice. A figure stood in the shadows, massive and still. Dre. He was Kaelin's war wolf, his most loyal general, the deadliest fighter in the Iron Fang. He had trained beside Seraphina for years, sparred with her, bled with her. He was not a man of many words. He stood in the gateway with his arms at his sides, and he looked at her with something broken in his dark eyes. He did not try to stop her. He did not speak. She wanted to say something. To thank him, perhaps, for being the one person who had shown her respect without condition. For the mornings when he had found her crying in the training yard and had simply sat beside her, silent and solid, until the tears stopped. For the way he had always treated her, not as the king's project, but as a warrior in her own right. But the words would not come. Grief had closed her throat like a fist. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she walked past him and through the gate. She crossed the border at dawn. The moment she passed beyond the territory's edge, the bond snapped. It was not metaphorical. It was physical, a violent, tearing sensation in her chest, as though something vital had been ripped out by the root. She staggered. Her knees hit the frozen earth. A sound came out of her that she did not recognize. Raw and animal, and utterly alone. For a long time, she knelt there in the frost, shaking. Then she stood up, and she kept walking. 3 months in the wild lands, and Seraphina learned that grief was a country with its own geography. There were valleys of numbness where she walked for days feeling nothing. There were sudden ridges of rage so steep they left her breathless. And there were plains of sorrow that stretched on forever, flat and featureless, where she simply existed and tried not to drown. She survived on instinct, hunted in her wolf form, slept in hollowed logs and abandoned dens. She spoke to no one, because there was no one to speak to. The borderlands between territories were empty places, haunted by rogues and exiles, and the occasional feral wolf too broken to find a pack. It was in the 4th month that she noticed the change. Her wolf was growing stronger, not gradually, not gently, violently. The shifts came faster now. Her senses sharpened until she could hear a rabbit's heartbeat from 50 yards. Her wolf form, once lean and unremarkable, was becoming something else entirely. Larger, denser, radiating a presence that made other wolves lower their heads instinctively. She had always been told she was an omega, weak, submissive, built to follow. But without the weight of a pack bond suppressing her, something ancient was waking up inside her. The rejection had not destroyed her. It had broken a seal. She was not an omega. She had never been an omega. Whatever she was, it had been locked away, dampened by the hierarchies and bonds that had surrounded her since childhood. Now, unbound and alone, the power rose like groundwater through cracked stone. The first time she shifted into her full form and saw her reflection in a still mountain lake, she did not recognize herself. The wolf that stared back at her was silver white, enormous, with eyes like molten amber. She stood at the water's edge for a long time, trembling not with weakness, but with the overwhelming force of something vast and old, finally being allowed to breathe. She threw back her head and howled, and the sound shook the trees and scattered birds for a mile in every direction. It was the first time in her life she had made a sound that the world could not ignore. In the 5th month, she met Marin. Marin was an exiled she-wolf from the Northern Ridge Pack, sharp-tongued, sardonic, built like a blade. She had been cast out for challenging her alpha's son and breaking his jaw. She found Serafina one evening, sitting by a river, staring at nothing, radiating enough dominant energy to flatten a small pack. "Either you're about to destroy something," Marin said, settling uninvited beside her, "or you need someone to talk to. I'm useful for both." Serafina looked at her for a long time. Then, for the first time in months, she almost smiled. The territory had no name. It was a stretch of forested highland between the recognized packlands, unclaimed, unmapped, forgotten. 24 wolves lived there, most of them women and children. They had no alpha. They had no structure. They lived in fear of raiding parties and starvation, and the slow, grinding erasure of existing without protection. Serafina found them by accident. She and Marin had been tracking game through the highlands when they stumbled across the settlement, a cluster of crude shelters around a central fire pit, faces gaunt with hunger, eyes dull with resignation. Something primal rose in Serafina's chest. Not pity, she had never had patience for pity. Something deeper. Recognition. She saw in their faces the same look she had carried for 16 years before Kaelin found her. The look of wolves who had been told, by the world's silence, that they did not matter. She did not ask to lead. She did not make speeches. She killed the mountain cat that had been terrorizing their livestock. She organized the hunters. She walked the perimeter and marked it with her scent. And her scent now carried the unmistakable weight of an alpha. One by one they chose her, not out of fear, out of something that felt, for the first time, like hope. She called them the Moonless Pack, because they had survived the darkest nights without any light to guide them. Marin became her second. The settlement grew. Word spread through the borderlands. There was a she-wolf in the highlands who took in the broken ones, the exiled ones, the ones no pack wanted, and she was making something out of nothing the way she always had. There was a boy named Fen who arrived half dead from exposure, barely 15, with whip scars across his back from a pack that used omegas as labor. There was an old healer called Thistle, who had been driven out of the Birchwood pack for refusing to poison a rival alpha's pups. There was a mated pair, Sable and Rowan, who had been separated by their pack for belonging to the wrong bloodlines, and who arrived at Seraphina's border holding each other's hands with the desperate grip of people who had run out of places to go. Seraphina took them all. She gave them purpose and structure, and the one thing none of them had ever been given, the belief that they were worth protecting. And in return, they gave her something she had not expected. They gave her a reason to be strong that had nothing to do with Kaelin, nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. They needed her. And in being needed, she began, slowly, to find out who she was when she was not defined by someone else's love. A year passed. Then 2. The Moonless Pack grew from 24 to 200. They were not the largest faction in the territories, not by far, but they were becoming the most feared, not because they raided or conquered, because they could not be broken. Every wolf who joined had already survived the worst thing that could happen to them. They had nothing left to lose, and everything to fight for. Seraphina trained them the way Kaelin had once trained her, with precision and patience, and an expectation of excellence that left no room for self-pity. She built fortifications. She established trade routes with sympathetic border packs. She created a council of 5, each member chosen for competence rather than bloodline. And she listened to them with a gravity that earned their absolute loyalty. Her name traveled around campfires and in whispered conversations between territory borders. Wolves spoke of the Wolf Queen, a she-wolf who had risen from nothing, who commanded with the authority of an ancient bloodline though she carried no name, whose wolf form was something terrible and magnificent, silver-white, enormous, eyes like molten amber. She was harder now. The softness that had once made her love so freely had been burned away, replaced by a controlled, devastating calm. She did not speak of the Iron Fang Pack. She did not speak of Kaelin. If anyone was foolish enough to ask, Meryn shut them down with a look that could curdle milk. But the hardness was not cruelty. She was fierce with her wolves, but she was also fair. She remembered what it felt like to be small and afraid and invisible, and she made certain that no wolf under her protection ever felt that way. She held court every 7th day, sitting on a plain wooden chair in the center of the settlement, and any wolf from the newest arrival to the oldest council member could bring a grievance or a request. She listened to every one. She ruled with the kind of authority that does not need to raise its voice. Visiting emissaries from border packs came to treat with her and left shaken. They had expected a ragged band of exiles. They found a disciplined, organized force with clear chains of command, well-maintained fortifications, and a queen whose presence could fill a room the way a thunderstorm fills a valley. But late at night, alone in her quarters, Seraphina sometimes pressed her hand to her chest, where the bond had once been. The wound had closed. The scar remained. She was stronger than she had ever been, more powerful, more certain, but she had not healed. She had simply learned to carry the weight. The threat came from the east. They called themselves the Blood Tide, a conquering force unlike anything the territories had seen in a generation. They moved through pack lands like wildfire, absorbing or annihilating every wolf in their path. Their leader was a warlord named Fenris, and the reports that reached Seraphina's council were consistent in their horror. He did not negotiate, he did not accept surrender, and he left nothing alive behind him. Pack after pack fell. The Eastern Wood, the Granite Claws, the Hollow Moon. Territories that had stood for centuries were swallowed in weeks. And the Blood Tide's advance was curving westward, directly toward the Iron Fang. Seraphina's council convened. "Let it burn," said Meren, and her voice held no malice, only pragmatism. "The Iron Fang rejected you. Why should we bleed for them?" Others agreed. The Moonless Pack owed the Iron Fang nothing, less than nothing. Let Kalen defend his own kingdom. Let his highborn Luna stand beside him and see if breeding could stop a war. Seraphina sat in silence and let them speak. She understood the logic. She even agreed with it, in the coldest part of her mind. But she kept thinking of the servants in the Iron Fang keep the cooks, the children, the elderly wolves who had no part in any king's decision. She kept thinking of the young warriors she had trained beside, who would die on those walls. Before she could decide, the decision came to her. Dre arrived at the Moonless Pack's border on a lathered horse, alone, carrying no weapons. He looked older, harder. There were new scars on his face. He dismounted and stood before Seraphina's guards, and when they brought him to her, he dropped to one knee not in submission, but in respect. "The Iron Fang will fall within the month," he said. "Kalen knows it. He sent no message. I came on my own." "Why?" "Because you're the only wolf alive who can stop what's coming." Their reunion was tense, electric, painful. 2 years of silence hung between them. Dre had always been the one person in the Iron Fang who had treated Seraphina as an equal, not a project, not a charity case, but a warrior. The night she left, the look in his eyes at the gate had told her everything he would never say. They walked the perimeter of the Moonless Pack's territory together that evening, while Meren watched from a distance with narrowed, evaluating eyes. Dre took in the fortifications, the organized patrols, the wolves who moved with discipline and purpose, and she watched the recognition settle over his features like dawn over a landscape. He had always known what she was capable of. Now he was seeing proof. "You built all this," he said. "Not a question. We built it. Every wolf here chose to be here. That makes all the difference." He looked at her then, and she saw something in his expression that she had not expected. Not awe, not pity, not the complicated guilt of a man who had watched her walk away and done nothing to stop it. Pride. Simple, uncomplicated pride, the kind one warrior feels for another. It loosened something in her chest that she had not realized was still tight. She agreed to the alliance, not for Kalen, for the wolves who had never wronged her. She rode through the Iron Fang gate on a black horse with 50 of her best wolves at her back, the same gate she had walked through alone in a ruined wedding gown 2 years ago. The sentries on the walls stared down at her in open shock. The Wolf Queen, here, real. The keep had changed. Or perhaps she had changed, and the keep simply looked smaller now. The corridors she had once navigated with careful deference she walked through with the unhurried confidence of a woman who answered to no one. Wolves stepped aside. Some bowed. Some simply stared. Kalen met her in the war room. He looked the same and entirely different. Still tall, still broad, the crown still at his brow. But there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before, and a tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and a war he was losing. When he saw her, truly saw her, standing in his war room in leather and steel, her silver white hair braided back from a face that had lost every trace of softness, the king of the Iron Fang could barely speak. "Seraphina," he said, just her name, as if the word itself was something fragile. "King Kalen," she replied, even, measured, the voice of one sovereign addressing another. Behind him, Isolde watched from the corner of the room. 2 years as Luna had given her a veneer of authority, but her pale eyes tracked Seraphina with the cold recognition of a woman who understood, instantly and completely, that the balance of power in the room had just shifted. Isolde was beautiful. Isolde was highborn. Isolde had everything Serafina had lacked. And none of it mattered now, not in the face of the woman who had walked into the room carrying the weight of 200 wolves' loyalty, won not by blood or title, but by something Isolde would never understand. The War Council convened that afternoon. Serafina took stock of the Iron Fang's situation with the detached efficiency of a surgeon examining a wound. It was worse than Dre had described. The eastern defenses were in shambles. Morale was crumbling. 3 of Kaelin's senior commanders had been killed in border skirmishes, and their replacements were green and frightened. The pack that had once been the most powerful in the territories was bleeding out slowly, and its king sat at the head of the table looking like a man watching his own house burn. Serafina did not look at Kaelin the way she once had, with love, with longing, with a desperate hope of someone who needed to be chosen. She looked at him the way you look at a lesson you have already learned. The negotiations lasted 3 days. Serafina approached them with the precision of a general and the detachment of a stranger. She laid out her terms: joint command of the combined forces, full autonomy for the Moonless Pack after the battle, and recognition of her territory by the Iron Fang Council. Non-negotiable. Kaelin agreed to everything. He had no choice. His army was depleted, his eastern border was crumbling, and the wolf sitting across the table from him commanded the most battle-hardened rogue force in the territories. But he kept reaching for something else, some thread of the old dynamic, some remnant of the bond they had shared. He called her Sarah once, the old nickname, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Serafina, she corrected, or Queen, if you prefer formality. He tried to apologize on the second night, found her alone on the ramparts, staring out at the dark tree line where the Blood Tide's advance fires flickered like malevolent stars. "I need to explain," he began. "No," she said, and the word was not angry. It was simply closed. "You don't. And I don't need you to." "Serafina, what I did." "I don't want your apology, Kaelin. I want your eastern flank by dawn." He stood there for a long moment, the wind pulling at his cloak, something raw and unfinished in his expression. Then he left. She did not watch him go. On the 3rd day, Isolde sought her out. Serafina was inspecting the armory when the Luna appeared in the doorway, elegant and composed, her golden hair pinned in the elaborate style of a high-born wolf. "You could have let this kingdom fall," Isolde said. It was not a question. "Yes. Why didn't you?" Serafina looked at her, this woman who had taken her place, who had stood beside the man who threw her away and felt nothing, no jealousy, no anger, just a vast empty clarity. "Because the wolves inside these walls are not the man who wronged me, and I do not punish the innocent for the sins of their king." Isolde held her gaze for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, not warmth exactly, but a grudging acknowledgement. She left without another word. In the days before the battle, she found herself spending more time with Dre. He had been made war general in her absence, the one appointment Kaelin had gotten right. They planned formations together, debated strategy, walked the fortifications side by side. He was the same as she remembered, steady, capable, unflinching. But there was something new in the way he looked at her, not with the broken tenderness of that night at the gate, but with a fierce, clear-eyed recognition. He saw what she had become, and it did not surprise him. "You always had this in you," he told her one evening, quietly, as they stood over a map of the eastern approach. Everyone else was too blind to see it. She did not respond. But she let the words land, and she let them stay. The blood tide came at dawn, pouring through the eastern passes like a dark river. There were hundreds of them, massive wolves, scarred and brutal, driven forward by Fenris's iron will. They hit the Iron Fang's outer defenses like a battering ram, Seraphina fought at the front. She shifted into her wolf form on the first charge, and the wolves around her, Iron Fang and Moonless alike, faltered at the sight. She was enormous. Silver-white, blazing with a power that seemed to bend the air around her, eyes like molten gold. The Wolf Queen, in full form, was not a creature of beauty. She was a force of nature, terrible and absolute. She tore through the Blood Tide's vanguard with a savagery that was almost surgical. Every strike was precise. Every movement was purposeful. This was not rage, it was mastery. She had spent 2 years honing herself into something that could not be broken, and now the blade was drawn. The Moonless Wolves fought like demons. They had been born in hardship, trained in adversity, and they followed Seraphina with the ferocious loyalty of wolves who had been given something worth fighting for. Beside them, the Iron Fang warriors rallied. The combined force held the eastern line, then pushed forward, then shattered the Blood Tide's formation. It was Meren who led the flanking maneuver that broke their left wing, screaming like a banshee, her dark wolf form cutting through the enemy like a scythe through wheat. It was Dre who held the center when the Blood Tide's elite guard made their final, desperate push, standing like a mountain in the current of the battle, refusing to give an inch. And it was the Moonless Pack's youngest warriors, wolves like Fen, the boy who had arrived half dead barely a year ago, who fought with the terrifying determination of people defending the first home they had ever known. Fenris fell at midday. Not to Kaelin, not to Dre. To Seraphina, who met him in single combat at the center of the field and broke him with a calm, devastating efficiency that the survivors would speak of for decades. He was massive, the largest wolf she had ever faced, black-furred and scarred, and radiating a violence that was almost elemental. But Seraphina had fought something harder than Fenris. She had fought despair and solitude and the annihilation of her own identity, and she had won. A warlord was nothing after that. The remaining Blood Tide wolves scattered. By nightfall, it was over. From the ramparts, Kaelin watched Seraphina lead the final charge, watched her command his wolves with an authority that was effortless and innate. She saved his kingdom, not because she loved it, because she chose to. And the difference between those two things carved something deep and permanent into the king's understanding of everything he had thrown away. He came to her that night. The camp was quiet, the aftermath of battle settling over the land like a held breath. The wounded were being tended, the dead were being gathered. Seraphina stood at the edge of the eastern tree line, alone, still in her human form, her armor streaked with blood that was not her own. Kaelin approached slowly, the way one approaches something sacred. He was wounded, a gash along his ribs that he had refused to let the healers close, as if the pain was something he needed to keep. "I have to tell you the truth," he said. She turned. She looked at him, and her expression was something he had never seen on her face before. Patient. Not cold, not angry, not wounded. Simply patient. The way you are with someone who is about to say something you already know. "The elders told me an Omega Luna would weaken the throne," he said. "They said the other packs would see it as vulnerability. That no one would respect a king who chose a mate with no blood, no name, no lineage." His voice cracked. "And I listened. I was afraid. I was a coward, and I chose the crown over you, and there hasn't been a single day since." "Kaelin." Her voice was quiet. Not gentle, exactly, but not cruel. "Stop." He stopped. "I know why you did it," she said. "I've known for a long time. I didn't need to hear it from you. I needed to learn it for myself, so I could understand what it meant." "What does it mean?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at him, this king she had once loved more than breath, more than her own survival. She searched herself for the wound, the way you press a bruise to check if it still hurts. And she found, with something between sorrow and relief, that the space where the pain had lived was simply empty, not healed, finished. The way a season ends, not because someone chose to stop it, but because it was time. "It means you didn't break me," she said. "You freed me." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "Is there any way back?" She thought about it. She owed him that much the honesty of actually considering the question rather than simply refusing. She thought about the years she had spent loving him, the mornings she had woken beside him in the early days and felt, for the first time in her life, that she was safe. She thought about the man who had crouched before a starving feral girl and told her she did not have to run. That man had been real. His kindness had been real. But his courage had not been enough when it mattered. And some things, once broken, do not mend. They simply become the soil from which new things grow. She looked at him for a long time, at the crown, at the shadows beneath his eyes, at the man who had once been her entire world and was now simply a man. "No," she said, gently, finally. He nodded. He stood there a moment longer, as if memorizing her face. Then he turned and walked back toward the keep, and Seraphina let him go the way the earth lets go of autumn, without bitterness, without regret, with the quiet understanding that some things are only meant to pass through you. She left at dawn. The moonless pack assembled at the Iron Fang's eastern gate, 50 wolves, battle-worn and unbroken, mounted and ready. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of morning that feels like a beginning. The Iron Fang wolves gathered on the walls to watch her go. This time, there was no silence of shame. There were fists pressed to chests in salute. There were whispered names: Wolf Queen, Seraphina, the one who came back. Kalen stood on the rampart, his hand resting on the stone, and he watched her the way you watch the sun set on a day you know you will never live again. Seraphina mounted her horse. The animal shifted beneath her, eager to run. She adjusted her grip on the reins and looked once at the keep, at the great hall where she had been unmade, at the walls that had once contained her entire understanding of who she could be. She thought of the girl she had been inside those walls. She did not grieve for her. That girl had been brave and trusting, and she had deserved better. But she was gone, and the woman who had grown from her wreckage was someone that girl could never have imagined. Then she turned forward. Dre rode beside her. He had said nothing that morning, but his presence was steady and warm, the way a fire is warm, not demanding attention, just there. Marin rode on her other side, looking supremely satisfied. As though the entire alliance had been a minor inconvenience she was glad to put behind her. Behind them, the moonless pack stretched out in formation, disciplined, proud, riding in the morning light like something out of an old song. As they passed through the gate and the road opened before them, heading north toward the highlands and home, Dre glanced at her. "You all right?" he asked. She considered the question honestly. She thought about the girl who had walked through this gate alone, in a ruined gown with nothing. She thought about the woman who was riding out of it now, with a pack at her back, and a territory waiting, and a power that no one had given her, because it had always been hers. She thought about the space in her chest where the old wound had been, and she found it quiet. Not empty, quiet. Like a room after a storm, where the air is clean and still and full of new light. "Yes," she said, and meant it. The moonless pack rode north. Behind them, the Iron Fang gate grew smaller, then distant, then invisible against the horizon. Seraphina did not look back. Ahead of her, the highlands rose green and wild and open, and the morning light caught the silver in her hair, and her wolves rode with her into whatever came next. She had been rejected at an altar. She had been broken in a wilderness. She had been remade by her own hands, and by the hands of every wolf who had chosen to follow her. She was the Wolf Queen, and she was going home.